Paranorman is a hilarious, horrific, and downright heartfelt animated stop-motion film that we all need to watch right now. This movie seems like a stereotypical horror comedy, but it's so powerful. For starters, this film is gorgeous. Attention to detail is an understatement. Every animation flows across the screen like running water. Then there's the comedy. Making fun of a genre is genuinely difficult, but Laika Studios is an expert in their craft. They also throw in powerful commentary about understanding our history. The Salem Witch trials were a brutal and horrifying time for so many women. Media that deconstructs the harassment and abuse that women faced during this period can help empower future generations. But to me, the most powerful themes in this film revolve around forgiveness and ending the cycle of violence. Agatha, the antagonist, was murdered because the town assumed she was a witch. Norman is also harassed throughout the narrative for being abnormal, although his approach to pain is a little different. He is able to reach out to his social resources. Many people assume that our hero's greatest gift is the ability to communicate with the dead, but this isn't true. Norman's greatest gift is his ability to empathize. Pain changes the way we understand the world around us. When people are hurt by Agatha's wrath, they never stop to recognize her anguish.
I just want my mommy.
Our hero is the only one who makes time to resonate with her tragic experiences. This supposed evil witch was an innocent girl who enjoyed listening to stories with her mom under the trees. Cultivating empathy in this way creates a surreal psychological journey for the audience. So today, I wanted to break down the psychology and themes in Paranorman. If you enjoyed this video, maybe like and share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to hit that sub button and notification bell so you always see my latest content. Norman has a unique connection to the dead. Unlike you or me, he is able to communicate and interact with those who have passed. He lives with his parents, his sister Courtney, and his deceased grandmother. Talking to his grandma is taboo at home, so his mental health is declining. Norman loves horror movies and zombies. The dead make him feel comfortable compared to his own family. They don't judge him or belittle him in the same way. People in town also seem weirded out by his gift. To make matters worse, he is constantly harassed at school. Alvin, the local bully, loves to pick on our hero. Norman's ostracization is painful, but it adds meaningful layers to his character. Out of nowhere, he starts seeing things that no one else can. Feeling dejected and frazzled, he heads home for the day. Then we meet the real hero, Neil. His quirky optimism cheers Norman up. Their characters are opposite in a way. Norman internalizes a lot of his trauma. Neil, by contrast, lets the insults slide off his back. They bond over their collective pain and common interests. They run into Norman's uncle, Mr. Pendergast. He warns the boys about the witch's curse. Our hero must use his gift to save everyone from harm. After hearing this warning, they shrug it off and continue on their journey. Mr. Pendergast goes home, but dies because of health complications. Once the dynamic duo reaches Neil's house, they decide to hang out for a while. Something about these interactions feels different. Instead of feeling lonely and scared, the boy who talks to ghosts feels accepted. Then we are introduced to his older meathead brother, Mitch. He falls into the same trap as the rest of the townsfolk. Mitch is hesitant about his little brother hanging out with the local weird kid. But the two have a wonderful time together, and Norman seems genuinely happy, which is a first. At nighttime, Neil and Norman act in the local play, depicting the Salem Witch trials. Everything in this scene feels so meaningful. Time begins to slow. Then another vision hits out of nowhere. Norman is being chased as one of the witches. The tree warns Norman that a curse is coming, and that the dead will soon rise from their graves. He puts two and two together and realizes the curse has some reference to the Salem Witch trials. Mr. Pendergast's ghost comes to warn his nephew again about the impending doom right around the corner. Let's take a second to really appreciate how much is on his plate right now. This poor kid tries his best to be kind to those around him. Everyone besides Neil and Norman's grandmother bullies him. Plus, he has the sole responsibility of defending the town from the witch's curse. Understandably, the boy who speaks to ghosts is crushed emotionally. He relies on his dead grandma for support. Ironically enough, she is a better support system than most of the living. She tells Norman it's okay to be scared, but you can't lose yourself to fear, which we will find out later is such a poignant piece of advice. Feeling empowered, he sets off on his duty. He accidentally runs into Alvin on the way to his goal, which upsets him greatly. First, we go to Mr. Pendergast's house. There, Norman wants to retrieve a book that will help him with the curse. He begins to read from the tome in hopes that it will end the nightmare. Alvin interrupts him and the dead start coming to life. Zombies rise from their graves. An attempt to communicate.
Stop.
While Alvin and Norman flee, Mitch, Courtney, and Neil make a search party for our hero. The two groups collide and reunite as one giant family. After hitting an undead person with their car, they speed off. Norman can't make sense of what's going on, so he asks his buddy at school for help. She tells the group to make their way to town hall for public records. Then they can get to the bottom of this curse. As they search for clues, the zombies attack, or so we might assume. In this universe, the humans are the real monsters. The townsfolk are enraged at the zombies' presence, so they begin to hunt them. Rather than wait around, the witch's curse comes to wreak havoc. Norman confronts this apparition in the clouds and is shot down. Then we see another flashback. This one is the most telling yet. Standing in front of a court, a little girl is sentenced to death. She begs them not to kill her, but their minds are made up. Everyone accuses her of witchcraft. I'll talk more about this historical event in later sections of the video, but this was the lived experiences of so many women during the Salem trials. Religiosity and supernatural thinking led people down a horrible path of destruction and harm. Women were assumed to be more susceptible to the ways of the devil, so any abnormal behavior was punished heavily. Many young girls were sentenced to death, just like in the movie. In the flashback, we can see the resentment that Agatha is starting to foster. Then we find out the resurrected zombies were the ones being cursed. These Puritans sentenced Agatha to death. As audience members, we can see the overwhelming guilt on their undead faces. For the first time, Norman is afraid of a zombie. But instead of letting his fear control his thoughts, he hears out his enemy. Rather than make excuses, the zombie speaks from his undead heart.
Why did you do it?
We were scared.
This sentiment is so powerful, because bigotry often comes from fear itself. Many who acted horribly during the witch trials had palpable anxiety about the devil and witchcraft, but their fears don't justify the cruelty they perpetuated. Laika Studios handles these themes gracefully. The zombies understand what they did was wrong, even if they were afraid. In a moment of desperation, they ask Norman for help. Norman decides that his only option is to face Agatha. The mob outside the town hall becomes too unruly, so the dead and undead leave in one big group. Just like the zombies, the mob is primarily ruled by fear. Alvin, Courtney, Mitch, Neil, and Norman defend the zombies from harm. After tensions subside, our hero goes to the center of the curse. Agatha's ghost begins to assault Norman, lashing out because of all the pain she's endured. Slowly, he begins to get through to her. Norman explains that Agatha's spiteful behaviors are no different than her accusers. He pleads with her, "Please try and remember the love that others have for you." Aggie finally recalls her name. She reminisces about the wonderful time she spent with her mom under the trees, listening to stories that all had happy endings, unlike her end, which was filled with suffering and despair. Agatha feels another burst of anger coming to the surface, which makes her embarrassed. Norman says he doesn't believe Aggie is a witch, which I imagine feels so validating after all her anguish. He then explains his own experiences dealing with abuse. Watching these scenes feels so unfair, because this young girl just wants to spend more time with her mom. Agatha, like many during the witch trials, was buried in an unmarked grave. After just one person bothers to hear her side of the story, her spirit is at peace. Sharing these depressing experiences with someone else allows her to let go of her resentment. The screen fades to white. After learning about this tragedy, we see the head of a witch statue, tearing down these harmful assumptions to create a more inclusive future. With one final look of guilt and sadness, even the zombie spirits are put to rest. Suddenly, the town weirdo is now the town hero. Laika even hits us with that deep social commentary. Rather than acknowledge their wrongdoings, many of the humans are quick to push their blame on the mob. In a way, the zombies act more human than some of the townsfolk, which is such a powerful message. The last scene of this movie is so touching. Norman's dad decides to hear out his son and talk to his mom. At first, it's a little awkward, but in the end, they are both happier for reaching out. Living during the colonial times was horrible, especially for women. Many Puritans were deeply terrified of being consumed by the devil. But it's important to remember that religion was the primary motivator of this fear. Without a full understanding of science, religion was used in its place. In January 1692, 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams began having fits, including violent contortions and uncontrollable outbursts of screaming. In hindsight, historians have speculated these happenings could be for a plethora of medical reasons, although the limitations of science and the prevalence of religion capitalized on Puritans' fears. Betty and Abigail placed the blame on a slave named Tituba, and 2 other women, Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good. Both Sarahs claimed innocence, but Tituba wasn't afforded the same luxury as a slave. Fearful of her circumstances and position in society, she admitted to witchcraft in an attempt to save herself. After the Puritans believed they discovered a witch, they assumed that there must be a coven. Hysteria and persecution spread through Salem like wildfire. Eventually, a trial was held. Women who were accused were put on trial with no counsel. Young girls, just like Agatha, had to defend themselves from wild accusations. Women turned on other women, but for good reason. When you have the potential to be called a witch, it's safer to point the blame elsewhere. With no real way to defend themselves, women were sentenced to death for crimes they didn't commit. In 1702, the general courts deemed these trials unlawful, but the damage was already done. Even before the events in Salem, the concept of witchcraft plagued European colonies. Thousands were executed, most of whom were women. So now that we've gone over the history, let's talk about why women were the victims of persecution. Women had very different expectations than men during this era. They were expected to make babies, raise kids, and tend to the home. Men, by contrast, usually commandeered positions of authority. They had majority power in government, economically, and in the church. Using the resources available to them, men were able to shift the focus to women without much pushback. What could Tituba do to stand up against the courts and the church? Women were targeted because of their role in society. Think about it like this. If men were the primary suspects, then society would have crumbled because of the positions they held. This idea of a witch wasn't spawned in nature, rather it was manufactured for a specific purpose, to disempower and control women's bodies and lives. One important thing to note is that the men in these circumstances were victims as well. Religious priming created fear and unrest in society. If you genuinely believe a child has the devil in them, then fear is a logical response. But the framing is everything. Where things differ between men and women is the lasting impact of the witch trials. Unfortunately, many harmful assumptions of that time period are still prevalent today. Even in Normanstown, there is a statue of a witch. While it's not used as much as an insult today, the notions of witches is still very real. Horror movies sometimes portray witches as these nasty evil creatures. But given such a tumultuous history, these portrayals can be harmful. For example, let's take Hermione from Harry Potter and compare them to Gruntilda from Banjo and Kazooie. In Harry Potter, being a witch is a form of empowerment. Hermione is a strong, thoughtful, and endearing character. Her ability to perform witchcraft actively improves her life and perspective. Using her powers, she can help fight to empower the marginalized. Gruntilda, by contrast, is a harmful portrayal of a witch. In Banjo and Kazooie, her primary motivation spawns from jealousy and insecurity. She's jealous of Tootie's good looks, so she kidnaps her to steal her beauty. So why is this depiction of a witch harmful? Well, for one thing, it plays on so many hurtful stereotypes that women constantly face. Women are jealous of each other's looks. Beauty is the only thing that matters to women. Women are willing to do whatever is necessary to get ahead. Even the end of the game has aged poorly in hindsight. Maybe she can learn the error of her ways and prioritize inner beauty, or she could learn to love her appearance regardless of what others think. So what is the solution for Gruntilda in the narrative? She's murdered by Banjo. Hermione is such an inspiring character compared to Gruntilda, using an idea that's perpetuated so much harm, but reinterpreting it in a form of betterment. That's why movies like Paranorman are so important as an art form. So many of us feel a personal connection to characters we resonate with. But the inverse is also true. When we see negative depictions of a certain group of people, it can influence our worldview. We all need a better understanding of our collective history to avoid harmful media representation for women. Since the last section was pretty heavy, I figured for this section, we could switch focus to something more lighthearted. Laika Studios' use of humor is masterful and serves many functions in the narrative. The satirization of common horror tropes is too good. As someone who loves horror movies, seeing the ridiculousness of some scenes is always fun. The beginning sequence is perfect. We hear a John Carpenter-esque soundtrack and a woman screaming while a zombie chases her. She screams for what seems like ages, waiting for the zombie to get close enough for the shot. When you think about the undead logically, Paranorman's portrayal makes so much sense. If zombies move this slowly, might as well grab a snack before we head out. Plus the undead would 100% fear us. The people in town are locked and loaded. Paranorman has so many clever jokes about horror, it's hard to include all the good ones. Some of my favorites were when a zombie's ear falls off and Norman gives it back, Mitch's lackluster reaction to a head falling off, and the mob's reaction to the zombies. Physical humor in particular is so good. Zombies getting their teeth stuck in doors, Mr. Pendergast's dead body flailing, even dismembered limbs coming to life. All these hilarious scenes deconstruct popular horror tropes with meticulously crafted humor. Not to mention, each character is an archetype commonly portrayed in horror movies. The jock, the cheerleader, the bully, the nerd. All these unique roles allow for some incredible humor, although comedy has a potentially even bigger role in the film. Paranorman is a real soul-crushing movie. So many scenes in this movie are depressing to think about. The scene when Agatha pleads to see her mom again destroyed me. Laughter is a great way to offset these negative feelings. Whenever something particularly tense happens in the narrative, we usually get some form of comedic relief. For example, after learning about the horrible things that happen in Salem, the group gives a hilarious speech to an upset mob. This studio always knows when, where, and how to use comedy in an effective manner. Props to you, Laika. To understand how bigotry stems from fear, we must first understand fear itself. The sensation of being afraid has a specific biological purpose. Anxiety is a way to alert our bodies that we are in the presence of danger. If we come into contact with a dangerous animal, for example, our bodies produce a biochemical reaction. In this instance, this anxiety or fear can help protect us from bodily harm. Although fear can also be weaponized in a more harmful or pernicious manner. Say we prime someone to believe that another person is of comparable threat to a wild animal. Even if this person physically poses no danger, the one who's been primed can fear for their life. Weaponizing a lack of understanding has been a powerful tool throughout history that's led to immeasurable harm. Priming is the idea that exposure to a certain stimuli can change our interactions with subsequent stimuli. A good example that we were taught in university is word priming. Some students get a selection of words, and the other half get a different selection. Depending on the words we're given, our minds come to different conclusions. Paranorman breaks down this fear and offers a potential solution to this ever-looming problem. Most of the violence and harm perpetuated in this movie comes from a place of fear. The Salem Witch trials happen because of religious priming. The mob's anger towards zombies comes from their priming based on the media they consume. Even the discrimination Norman feels comes in large part from people's assumptions around him. If everyone is always primed with assumptions, then how do we stop the harm associated? We should let Norman's actions guide our behavior. Laika's solution to this issue is first-hand, open-minded interactions. While this might not seem like much, this idea is so powerful. Our hero has to look past all the harm the zombies committed, something these Puritans were never able to do. Had any one of them stopped to genuinely hear out this girl's plight, things could have ended differently. The men were afraid of this young girl because they knew nothing about her. No one likes assumptions. We all want to be seen and heard for who we are, but fear is antithetical to this process. First-hand interactions mitigate this fear because oftentimes we find we have common ground where we might not expect it. Agatha's fear is harmful in a similar way. She hurts a lot of people because she's afraid to open up. Recontextualizing our fear and interacting with others can be powerful ways to control our anxieties. Isolation can be every bit as destructive as fear to our mental health. Let's compare Agatha and Norman. They have a very similar journey in terms of harassment. So why does Norman overcome his sadness, but Agatha is consumed by hers? The answer lies in how much they socialize. We need each other to survive and help process our pain. Norman's life turns out different than Agatha's thanks to the people in his life. Neil gave him perspective. Alvin teaches him patience. His sister teaches him to be brave. Mitch shows him we can change our harmful assumptions. Even his enemies offer him valuable insight. The zombies understand the power of recognizing their wrongdoings. Each one of these elements meaningfully impacts Norman. Positive social resources offer him a world of perspective. He has a close group of friends who he can lean on in times of need. Agatha, on the other hand, lives a life of complete solitude. With no one to confide in, she internalizes her pain. Isolation comes with a slew of health concerns. A lack of social stimulation has been found to decrease memory performance, disrupt homeostasis, and lower our resiliency to stress. Agatha's character demonstrates the impacts of loneliness in real time. Whenever she becomes upset, she shuts down. She fixates on the wrongs others have done to her. But when someone shifts her perspective a bit, she begins to change too. Having just one social resource in times of need can make a world of difference. For over 300 years, the town has read a story to keep Agatha's wrath at bay. Although, when one person takes the time to hear her plight, she is able to feel happiness again. Paranorman shows us just how important social resources are in our life. We might assume that we don't have a big impact on others, but our lives can empower those around us. By sharing our stories, we can make everyone feel included. Norman's greatest gift is his ability to empathize. His life has been rough. He's constantly bullied at school. His home life is pretty unstable too. Norman spends the majority of his time in solitude because everyone assumes he's a creep. When you have a life like this, we could see how someone could find comfort by conversing with the dead. At least the ghosts treat him like a person. While these experiences suck, they add so much perspective to Norman's life. Our hero leads with empathy. Even though the world is exceptionally cruel, he tries his best to be kind. For example, lots of kids are super mean to Neil, but Norman doesn't care about his appearance. He's just happy someone acknowledges his humanity. Plus, he can empathize with Neil's harassment as well. Norman is extraordinary because he will hear out anyone, even his enemies. The zombies are such good characters in the movie. They are set up to be the conventional bad guy. Then, we find out that the townsfolk are bloodthirsty. They are framed as the antagonists in the plot for a while. When we think we are confident who is to blame, come to find out the zombies are horrible, but not because they are undead. They sold their humanity to hunt down an innocent girl, and their current form is the result of that wrongdoing. Most of us would say, screw the zombies, they should be killed. Although it's important to remember that any one of us could end up in that position if we are in the exact same circumstances. Norman's pain gives him clarity. Even though the zombies acted horribly, he understands how much it hurts to be written off. By listening to them, he gathers meaningful insight. Norman was beginning to feel resentful towards the abusers in his life. How can people be this mean all the time? After hearing the zombies' plight, he realizes that anyone can do horrible things if put in a certain environment. Once he deals with the zombies, Norman uses his gift again. He wants to put an end to everyone's suffering, so he goes to the source of the pain. Agatha is ruthless. She goes out of her way to harm our hero. Not many people can look past physical abuse. But Norman resonates with how Agatha feels. If anyone knows what it's like to be ostracized, it's him. He understands the loneliness that comes from persecution, how shitty it feels when you're completely alone. Using these emotions, he helps channel Agatha's thoughts in a more positive direction. Experiencing pain or sadness is horrible, but these sensations serve a necessary purpose in our lives. Look at how different Agatha acts when people take a second to hear her plight. She doesn't want to hurt others, but she didn't cope well. Agatha commits horrible acts because she's lost her ability to empathize. She wants to be heard, but is unwilling to listen. Norman's gift is so important because we can all lead our lives with understanding, assuming seems convenient. But it's important to remember that the notion of a witch was created based off false assumptions. True forgiveness is exceptionally challenging, although an unwillingness to forgive stands in direct contrast to our happiness. Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama came together to work on a book called The Book of Joy. They talk about how forgiveness is ultimately a pathway to greater happiness. Until we can forgive the person who harmed us, that person will hold the key to our happiness. That person will be our jailer. When we forgive, we take back control of our own fate and our feelings. We become our own liberator. The idea that these two assert maps pretty well onto the themes in Paranorman. The zombies and Agatha both have problems with forgiveness. Let's start with the undead. Their pain stems from the guilt they experience after murdering an innocent girl. In a way, their guilt is their true curse. The zombies never learn how to forgive themselves. At the end of the film, their spirits pass on, but there is still a deep sadness in their eyes. Agatha has a different struggle than the zombies. The deceased struggle being compassionate to themselves. By contrast, the supposed witch harbors resentful feelings towards her abusers. Holding on to angry feelings might seem beneficial. I'm protecting myself from harm. If I remember those who hurt me, I won't fall for the same mistake twice. But this line of thinking can lead us down a path of destruction. Agatha is the only one holding on to the past. The Puritans are gone. Everyone's forgotten her. Getting angry in this instance has no positive utility, although she is actively harming herself by fixating on the bad. Mark Twain has a poignant quote that encapsulates what I mean. Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured. We can see how much Agatha is hurting. What happened to her was so unfair and cruel. It's completely normal to feel angry, even resentful, but how we process these feelings is the crucial component. Norman helps Agatha by teaching her how to forgive. Before this interaction, she was completely stuck in the past. Holding on to her negative emotions destroyed the person she used to be. Forgiveness gives Agatha her humanity back. By forgiving others, she can empathize with the harm she's inflicted. In psychology, researchers have studied forgiveness and its impacts on our mental health. One review characterized forgiveness into two categories: forgiveness and unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is the negative reactions we harbor towards a stressful event. Forgiveness is the direct counter to unforgiveness. For example, being sympathetic or compassionate to someone else's circumstances. Instead of assuming Alvin is inherently evil, maybe we can acknowledge that he's just as scared and susceptible to social pressures as anyone else. The research found that taking this extra step can reduce stressful feelings. Those who empathize with someone they were upset with had better mental health. Forgiveness and empathy go hand in hand. When we put ourselves in someone's circumstances, we can gather a world of perspective. Take the undead, for example. These Puritans acted in an evil manner, partaking in horrendous atrocities. So screw them, right? Well, let's take a moment to walk in their undead shoes. Back in the 1600s, religion was a part of everyone's life. Without the medical understanding we have now, seizures and contortions can look like possessions. Then we have the priming at play. Religious institutions are constantly harping on this idea of people getting consumed by the devil, especially women. Everyone in town is afraid of attacks from neighboring lands and a coven of witches. With all this social pressure, causing harm isn't out of the question. But when we refuse to empathize, then the zombies are inherently evil. Empathy makes forgiveness that much easier. Forgiving each other and ourselves takes so much work. Showing kindness to those who have wronged us seems awful. But by forgiving, we are ultimately freeing ourselves. Letting go of the negative feelings is the best sensation in the world. Agatha is so happy once she is freed from her pain. Paranorman can teach us so much about how to end the cycle of pain. The real curse in this film is the curse of bigotry. People are mean to Norman because they assume. Assumptions also plague the undead. Even Agatha is thought to be this horrible entity. Fear is oftentimes the motivating factor in these interactions.
We were scared.
The townsfolk are afraid of zombies because of the media's depictions of them. Agatha was murdered by the Puritans because of fear. Discrimination is a huge problem for so many of us. So what does Laika offer as the solution to this complex issue? To end the cycle of pain, we have to contextualize our fears, empathize with those who have hurt us, be able to forgive ourselves and one another. But most importantly, reach out to others in times of need. While this list sounds daunting, it's not that bad. When we feel sad or angry or alone, we aren't considering how much these emotions impact our lives. All these negative sensations can be linked to lower quality of life in the long run. Besides the impact on ourselves, living in fear and without compassion can lead to future instances like Salem. Norman stands as a shining example of how we should act. Every day, this poor kid gets harassed by everyone, having to burden this extra responsibility at such a young age. But time and time again, he uses his perspective to guide his decision making. Norman could have easily turned into Agatha if things didn't change for him. Neil was the first big turning point. Instead of judging our hero, he loves him for who he is. As he makes more friends along the way, he gets the strength to battle his fears, standing up to the undead and Agatha's wrath. Rather than write off his enemies, he empathizes with their plight. Understandably upset, Norman processes his anger healthily, forgiving the Puritans by walking in their shoes. Using all the tools he's acquired thus far, he saved Agatha. After her spirit is put to rest, we can see what reality looks like when we lead with love. Norman has a powerful connection to his family now. The local bully seems to have learned the error of his ways. People in town no longer fear the undead. Compare this to just moments ago, and we can see how much happier everyone seems. Fostering compassion is a difficult goal to accomplish, but Norman's grandmother's words can help guide us in the right direction. It's okay to be afraid, but never let fear change who you are. Thanks for checking out this video. I appreciate it. Paranorman is such a good movie and one of Laika's best. There are so many powerful themes that this film deconstructs. Fear can absolutely change who we are if we get consumed by it. Empathy ultimately gives every character more perspective. Forgiveness can unshackle our minds from our more painful experiences. Just like in the movie, bad assumptions can lead to real harm. The Salem Witch trials were the result of fear and a lack of understanding. Reaching out to those around us in times of need can offset this fear. Taking a second to live in someone else's mind can help us contextualize our harmful thoughts. Tackling these problems requires a multifaceted approach. It took the town over 300 years to end the cycle of pain. Ending racism, sexism, and other forms of bigotry are exceptionally difficult. These issues won't get solved overnight like in Paranorman, but opening up our hearts and leading our lives with compassion is worth it. Creating media that shows these issues can help empower women and teach us all about our collective history. Let me know down in the comments what you learned from Paranorman. Did this movie offer you meaningful insight? I'd love to hear from you.